A poor waitress saves a stranger from a burning car. She has no idea the man she's risking her life for will soon change everything she thought she knew about power, fear, and kindness. The smell of burnt coffee still clung to Althea's uniform as she drove her rusted Honda down Highway 9 at 11:47 p.m. Another double shift at Murphy's Diner had drained every ounce of strength from her 26-year-old body. Her tips tonight? $32. Barely enough to cover her grandmother's medication, let alone rent. But what she witnessed next would make her forget about money entirely. A black SUV came screaming around the bend, headlights cutting through the darkness like angry eyes. The vehicle swerved violently, clipped the guardrail, and flipped 3 times before slamming into a tree. The impact echoed through the night like thunder. Then came the flames. Orange tongues of fire began licking at the undercarriage, growing hungrier by the second. Smoke billowed from the crumpled hood. Inside that metal coffin, Althea could see a figure slumped over the steering wheel. Her hands trembled as she pulled over. Every logical thought screamed at her to call 911 and wait. She had no training for this, no equipment, no business risking her life for a complete stranger. Yet something deeper than logic moved her feet. She sprinted toward the wreckage, her worn sneakers slipping on the wet asphalt. The heat hit her face like a wall, but she pressed forward. Through the spider-webbed windshield, she could make out a man in an expensive suit, blood trickling down his forehead. "Sir, can you hear me?" She pounded on the passenger window. No response. The flames were spreading faster now, creeping toward the fuel tank. Althea knew she had maybe 30 seconds before this became a death trap for both of them. Using a jagged piece of metal from the crash, she smashed the passenger window. Glass rained down, cutting her arms, but she didn't stop. She reached inside, feeling for a pulse on the stranger's neck. Still alive, but barely. The man was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair and features that looked carved from stone. Even unconscious and bleeding, there was something commanding about his presence. Something that made her wonder who he really was. "Come on," she whispered, trying to unbuckle his seatbelt. "Don't you dare die on me." The metal was jammed. The flames were getting closer. She could hear the fuel tank beginning to groan under the heat. Would you risk everything for someone you'd never met? Althea made her choice. She grabbed the man under his arms and pulled with strength she didn't know she possessed. His dead weight fought against her, but desperation gave her power. Inch by inch, she dragged him through the broken window, ignoring the glass cutting deeper into her skin. 20 feet from the car, then 30, then 50. She collapsed onto the grass, the stranger's head cradled in her lap, just as the SUV exploded behind them. The fireball lit up the night sky, sending waves of heat washing over them. Debris rained down like deadly confetti. But they were alive, both of them. As sirens wailed in the distance, Althea looked down at the man she'd just saved. Blood matted his hair, and his expensive suit was torn and dirty. But his chest rose and fell steadily. She had no idea that in saving this stranger's life, she had just signed her own death warrant. Because the man bleeding in her arms wasn't just anyone. He was someone the entire city feared. The man's eyes opened slowly, like curtains being drawn back from a window that had been dark too long. They were steel gray, cold as winter rain, and when they focused on Althea's face, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "You're awake," she whispered, relief flooding her voice. "Thank God. I thought." "Why?" His voice was rough, barely above a whisper, but there was something sharp underneath, something that made her skin crawl. "Why what?" Althea shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that this stranger's head was still resting in her lap on the side of a dark highway. "Why would you save me?" The question hit her like a slap. Not "thank you." Not "are you hurt?" Just cold, calculated curiosity about her motives. Because you were dying," she stammered. The car was on fire. What else was I supposed to do? He studied her face with the intensity of someone solving a puzzle. His gray eyes moved from her tear-streaked cheeks to her blood-stained uniform, taking inventory of every detail. You don't know who I am. It wasn't a question. It was a statement that somehow sounded like an accusation. Should I? For the first time, something that might have been a smile flickered across his lips. But it wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile a shark might give right before strikes. Most people in this city would have kept driving. Althea felt her heart skip. There was something in his tone, something that suggested she had stumbled into waters much deeper and more dangerous than she could imagine. Well, I'm not most people, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The stranger slowly pushed himself up to a sitting position, wincing as he moved. Even injured, even bleeding, there was an aura of controlled power about him, like a loaded gun that someone had forgotten to put on safety. No, he said, his eyes never leaving her face. You're definitely not. In the distance, the ambulance sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights began painting the trees in alternating colors. But neither of them moved. What's your name? He asked. Althea. Althea Cruz. He repeated her name slowly, as if he was memorizing it, as if he was filing it away somewhere important. And you work at? His eyes dropped to her uniform. Murphy's Diner. Downtown. Why was she telling him this? Something about his presence demanded answers, even though every instinct screamed at her to run. The paramedics arrived then, flooding the scene with bright lights and urgent voices. But as they loaded the stranger onto a stretcher, his eyes never left Althea's face. Althea Cruz, he said one more time, just loud enough for her to hear over the chaos. I won't forget. As the ambulance doors slammed shut and disappeared into the night, Althea stood alone on the highway, covered in blood and glass, wondering what she had just set in motion. She thought she had saved a life tonight. She had no idea she had just painted a target on her back. Because in 24 hours, she would discover that the man she risked everything to save wasn't just feared by the city. He owned it. And now he owned her too. 3 hours after the crash, Althea sat in the hospital waiting room, her hands still shaking from adrenaline. The nurse had bandaged her cuts, but the real wounds went deeper. She couldn't shake the memory of those cold gray eyes, or the way he'd said her name like he was carving it into stone. Excuse me, miss? A police officer approached, his badge catching the fluorescent light. Officer Martinez, according to his name tag. He looked tired, like he'd been working this case all night. You're the one who pulled him out? Althea nodded. Is he going to be okay? Martinez studied her face carefully. You really don't know who you saved tonight, do you? Should I? The officer's expression shifted. Surprise mixed with something that looked almost like pity. That's Damien Holt. The name hit her like ice water. Everyone in the city knew that name. Damien Holt. The billionaire who owned half the downtown real estate. The man whose business dealings made front-page news, and whose enemies had a habit of disappearing. That's impossible, she whispered. He was just a man in a suit. Martinez shook his head. Lady, you just saved the most dangerous man in the state. Holt's got his fingers in everything: construction, shipping, politics. Some say he's the real reason crime rates dropped in certain neighborhoods. Others say he just moved it underground. Althea's stomach turned. She thought about those calculating eyes, the way he'd smiled like a predator sizing up prey. He controls judges, cops, politicians. Rumor is, cross Damien Holt and you don't just lose your job, you disappear entirely. The room started spinning. Althea gripped the plastic chair until her knuckles went white. But he seemed so. She couldn't finish. How do you explain that a feared billionaire had looked almost human bleeding in her lap? Don't let the fancy suits fool you. 3 months ago, a city councilman tried to block one of Holt's development projects. The guy's house mysteriously caught fire. Family barely made it out alive. Martinez leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Last year, a journalist started digging into Holt's shipping contracts. She ended up in the river, officially ruled a suicide, but nobody who knew her believed it. Althea's hands trembled. She'd risked her life to save a monster. A billionaire who crushed people like insects just because he could. Why are you telling me this? Because, lady, you need to understand what you walked into. Damien Holt doesn't forget faces. And he sure as hell doesn't forget debts. The officer's words hung in the air like smoke from the burning SUV. You think I'm in danger? Martinez was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much. Holt's been unconscious for 3 hours. But when he wakes up, he's going to remember everything, including the waitress who saved his life. Althea closed her eyes, but she could still see those steel-gray eyes staring back at her. Still hear him saying her name like a promise. Or a threat. Just tell me what you saw. Detective Rodriguez clicked her pen, waiting. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and broken dreams. Althea sat in a plastic chair that squeaked every time she moved, trying to figure out how much truth was too much truth. I was driving home from work. Saw the crash. Pulled him out before the car exploded. That's it. Althea nodded, but her stomach twisted. She wasn't lying, exactly. She just wasn't telling the whole story. She didn't mention the way Holt had looked at her, the cold calculation in his voice, the feeling that saving him had been the biggest mistake of her life. You didn't talk to him? He was unconscious. Another lie. But what was she supposed to say? That the city's most feared billionaire had interrogated her about her motives while bleeding on the side of a highway? Rodriguez wrote something down. Any reason you risked your life for a stranger? Wouldn't you have done the same? Althea shot back. The detective looked up, studying Althea's face. Honestly, most people would have called 911 and waited for professionals. That stung because it was true. Althea had acted on pure instinct, and now she was paying the price. Mr. Holt's going to be fine, by the way. Concussion, some cuts, but he'll live thanks to you. Althea forced a smile. Good. But inside, she wondered if the world would have been safer with Damien Holt buried in that burning car. 20 minutes later, she walked out of the station into the gray morning light. Her Honda sat in the parking lot like a loyal dog, dented and faithful. She climbed inside and sat there for a moment, trying to process everything. Martinez's words echoed in her head. Holt doesn't forget faces. And he sure as hell doesn't forget debts. What kind of debt did a billionaire owe a broke waitress? She started the engine and drove toward home, telling herself she'd never see Damien Holt again. He lived in a world of penthouse apartments and private jets. She lived paycheck to paycheck in a studio apartment with a leaky ceiling. Their worlds had collided for one terrible night, and now they would separate forever. At least, that's what she told herself. But deep down, Althea knew she was wrong. Men like Damien Holt didn't just disappear from your life. They consumed it. You're late. Althea rushed through Murphy's Diner at 6:47 a.m., her uniform still wrinkled from the night before. She'd managed exactly 2 hours of sleep, and her hands still smelled like smoke and antiseptic. Frank Murphy stood behind the counter, his arms crossed and his face set in stone. At 65, he'd been running this diner longer than Althea had been alive. His patience for excuses had dried up somewhere around 1995. Frank, I can explain. Save it. He held up a hand. Third time this month you've been late. Customers don't wait around for waitresses who can't tell time. Althea's heart sank. She needed this job. Without it, she couldn't pay for her grandmother's heart medication, couldn't keep the lights on in their tiny apartment. It was an emergency. There was a car accident. There's always something with you, Cruz. Always some sob story about why the rules don't apply. Heat rose in Althea's cheeks. Last month, she'd been late because her grandmother had fallen. The month before because their landlord had locked them out over a clerical error with the rent check. I saved someone's life last night. Frank's laugh was sharp and bitter. Yeah? Well, heroes don't pay rent. And they sure don't keep jobs when they can't show up on time. The other waitresses pretended to be busy, but Althea could feel their eyes on her. Betty, who'd been here 15 years. Carmen, who had 3 kids and couldn't afford to care about anyone else's problems. Please, Frank. I'll work extra shifts. I'll take the worst tables. Just don't. You're fired. The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. Around them, the diner kept moving. Coffee percolated. Bacon sizzled. Customers complained about cold eggs. But Althea's world had just collapsed. Frank, clean out your locker. I'll mail your final check. She stood there for a moment, paralyzed. 26 years old, and her life was falling apart because she'd done the right thing. Because she'd risked everything to save a stranger. Would you have done the same? If you knew that pulling someone from a burning car would cost you everything, your job, your security, your ability to care for the person you loved most, would you still do it? Althea walked to her locker on legs that felt like rubber. Inside were a spare uniform, some aspirin, and a photo of her grandmother. Abuela's smile looked back at her, trusting and proud. How was she going to explain this? How do you tell the woman who raised you that kindness doesn't pay the bills? As she cleaned out her locker, Althea couldn't help but think about the man she'd saved. Damien Holt was probably waking up in a private hospital room, surrounded by flowers and lawyers and people paid to care about his well-being, while she was getting fired from a job that barely paid minimum wage. The world had a twisted sense of justice. Save a life, lose everything. But as Althea walked out of Murphy's diner for the last time, she realized something that surprised her. She'd still do it again. Even knowing the cost, even facing an uncertain future, she couldn't imagine driving past that burning car and doing nothing. Maybe that made her a fool. Or maybe that made her human. The news broke at 3:47 p.m. Althea was sitting in her grandmother's kitchen, staring at a stack of unpaid bills and trying to figure out how to stretch $32 until she found another job. The TV droned in the background. Some afternoon talk show her grandmother loved. Then the screen went black. Breaking news. Billionaire Damien Holt survives fiery car crash on Highway 9. Holt, CEO of Titan Industries and one of the city's most powerful figures, was pulled from the wreckage by an unnamed Good Samaritan. Althea's coffee mug slipped from her hands, shattering on the linoleum floor. The screen filled with footage of the accident scene. Police cars, fire trucks, the twisted metal that had almost become Holt's tomb. Then the camera cut to file footage of the man himself. Damien Holt in a $1,000 suit, walking into a courthouse. Damien Holt at a ribbon-cutting ceremony, his smile cold and calculated. Damien Holt shaking hands with the mayor, both men looking like they'd rather be holding knives. But it was his eyes that made Althea's blood freeze. Those same steel-gray eyes that had stared up at her from the highway. The eyes that had studied her like she was a problem to be solved. Holt is currently recovering at St. Catherine's Medical Center. Hospital officials say he suffered a concussion and multiple lacerations, but is expected to make a full recovery. The news anchor's voice seemed to come from underwater. Althea watched, transfixed, as the screen showed more footage of Holt's empire. Skyscrapers with his name etched in gold. Construction sites where his developments were reshaping the skyline. Holt's business empire spans real estate, shipping, and construction, with an estimated net worth of $2.4 billion. However, his methods have often drawn controversy. The report shifted to show protesters outside one of his buildings. Families who'd been evicted to make way for luxury condos. Small business owners who'd been forced out by rising rents. Critics accuse Holt of using intimidation tactics and political connections to expand his influence. Multiple investigations into his business practices have been launched, though charges have never been filed. Althea's grandmother shuffled into the kitchen, her walker scraping against the floor. "Mija, what happened? Why did you drop?" Her voice trailed off as she saw the TV screen. "That's him, abuela. That's the man I pulled from the car." Her grandmother's weathered hand flew to her mouth. She'd lived in this city for 70 years. She knew the name Damien Holt, and she knew what it meant. "Ay, Dios mío. Althea, what have you done?" On the screen, the news anchor continued. "Police are asking anyone with information about the Good Samaritan who saved Holt's life to come forward." Althea grabbed the remote and turned off the TV. The kitchen fell silent except for the drip of the leaky faucet and the sound of her grandmother's worried breathing. She hadn't just saved anyone. She'd saved him. The man who owned half the city. The billionaire who destroyed lives like other people stepped on ants. And now he knew her name. The knock came at 6:15 p.m., sharp and authoritative. 3 precise raps that somehow sounded like a command. Althea peered through the peephole of her grandmother's apartment and felt her blood turn to ice. 2 men in expensive black suits stood in the hallway, their faces hidden behind dark sunglasses despite being indoors. "Althea Cruz?" The taller one spoke without moving his lips, like a ventriloquist. She pressed her back against the door, heart hammering. "Who's asking?" "Mr. Holt would like to see you." The name hit her like a physical blow. She'd spent 2 days telling herself she'd never hear from him again, that their worlds would stay separate, that saving his life had been a one-time intersection of fate. She'd been lying to herself. "I don't know what you're talking about," she called through the door. The shorter man stepped forward. Even through the peephole, she could see the outline of something bulging beneath his jacket. Something gun-shaped. "Ma'am, Mr. Holt doesn't like to be kept waiting. He's asked politely for a meeting. Let's keep it that way." Althea's grandmother appeared in the hallway behind her, walker scraping against the worn carpet. "Mija? Who is it?" "Nobody, abuela. Just go back to your room, please." But her grandmother had lived through enough to recognize danger when it knocked on her door. Her weathered face went pale as she saw the men through the peephole. "They're not going away, are they?" she whispered. The tall man spoke again. "We have a car waiting downstairs. Mr. Holt is recovering from his injuries, but he insisted on this meeting. He wants to thank you personally for saving his life." "Thank her." "Right. Because billionaire sociopaths were known for their gratitude. But what choice did she have? These weren't the kind of men who took no for an answer. And if Damien Holt wanted to find her, a locked door wasn't going to stop him. "Give me 5 minutes," she said. 2 minutes. Althea's hands shook as she grabbed her jacket. Her grandmother caught her arm with surprising strength. "Don't go, Mija. Men like that, they don't want to thank people. They want to own them." "I have to. If I don't—" She couldn't finish the sentence. If she didn't go willingly, they'd make her go unwillingly. And her grandmother might get hurt in the process. "I'll be back, abuela. I promise." But as Althea opened the door and stepped into the hallway, she wondered if she was making a promise she couldn't keep. The elevator ride down felt like descending into hell. Neither man spoke. They flanked her like prison guards, their presence filling the small space with menace. Outside, a black sedan waited at the curb, engine running. The kind of car that screamed money and power and things that happened in the dark. As they drove through the city streets, Althea watched her neighborhood disappear in the rearview mirror. The broken streetlights, the corner stores with bars on their windows, the world where she belonged. They were taking her somewhere else entirely, somewhere she didn't belong and might not survive. The Holt mansion crouched on Riverside Drive like a sleeping beast, all sharp angles and dark windows. 15,000 square feet of intimidation, surrounded by walls that could stop a tank and gates that looked like they belonged on a prison. Althea had seen pictures in magazines, but being here in person was different. The wealth was suffocating. Every surface screamed money, from the marble driveway to the golden lions flanking the entrance. "This way, ma'am." The taller suited man led her through doors that probably cost more than she'd make in 5 years. Inside, the mansion felt like a museum. Cold, sterile, beautiful things locked behind glass and rope, never meant to be touched by human hands. Her footsteps echoed on marble floors that stretched toward a ceiling 2 stories high. Paintings that belonged in galleries stared down at her with dead eyes. This wasn't a home. It was a fortress built to keep the world out and its owner safe inside. They walked through room after room, each more intimidating than the last. A library with books that looked like they'd never been opened. A dining room with a table that could seat 20 people who'd probably rather be anywhere else. Finally, they stopped at a set of double doors made from some kind of dark wood that looked older than the city itself. "Wait here," the man said, and disappeared inside. Althea stood alone in the hallway, feeling like a mouse in a cathedral. Everything about this place was designed to make visitors feel small, powerless, insignificant. It was working. The doors opened again, and there he was. Damien Holt looked different than he had bleeding on the highway. Clean, powerful, dangerous in a way that expensive clothes and unlimited money could make a man dangerous. A white bandage covered part of his forehead, and there were stitches along his left cheek, but his eyes were the same steel gray that had haunted her dreams. He studied her for a long moment, like a scientist examining a specimen under a microscope. "Come in." His office was the size of her entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the river, where lights from the far shore twinkled like fallen stars. Behind his desk, awards and photographs showed him shaking hands with senators, judges, police commissioners, people who were supposed to protect the city, all smiling like they were his best friends, or his employees. "Sit." Althea remained standing. Something about this man made her want to run, and sitting felt like surrender. I said sit. This time, it wasn't a request. She lowered herself into a leather chair that probably cost more than her grandmother's medication. Damien walked around his desk, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. Even injured, even bandaged, he radiated power. "Do you know why you're here? You wanted to thank me." The words tasted like ashes in her mouth. That cold smile flickered across his lips. "Thank you? For what?" The question caught her off guard. For saving your life." "Did I ask you to save my life?" Heat rose in her cheeks. "You were unconscious. You couldn't ask for anything." "Exactly." He leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "So I'll ask again. Why did you do it?" "Because it was the right thing to do." "The right thing." He repeated the words like they were in a foreign language. "Tell me, Althea. May I call you Althea? Do you know what happened to the last person who did the right thing regarding my business?" She didn't answer. She was afraid to know. His name was Detective Rodriguez. He thought it was the right thing to investigate some shipping contracts. Very thorough man. Very dedicated to justice. Damien walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. They found him in his car at the bottom of Miller's Quarry. Officially ruled a suicide. Strange thing about suicides, though, they usually don't involve broken fingers and missing teeth. Althea's mouth went dry. "Are you threatening me?" He turned back to face her, and for a moment, she saw something flicker in those gray eyes. Something that might have been surprise. "Threatening you?" "No, Althea. I'm trying to understand you. Understanding me isn't complicated." Althea's voice came out stronger than she felt. "I saw someone in danger. I helped. That's it." Damien moved closer, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. "But it's not that simple, is it? You didn't just help. You risked your life. You could have died pulling me from that car. So could you if I hadn't." "True." He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Expensive. Cold. Like money and power had a scent. "But I'm worth $2.4 billion. What are you worth?" The question hit like a slap. "Excuse me." "Market value. What's your net worth, Althea Cruz?" She stood up, Anger overriding fear. I'm not a commodity. Everyone's a commodity. Some are just priced higher than others. He gestured around the room. This office is worth more than most people make in a lifetime. The painting behind my desk? $3 million. The watch on my wrist could pay for a house. So why would someone worth nothing risk everything to save someone worth billions? It defies logic. It defies human nature. Althea stared at him, finally understanding. This wasn't gratitude or curiosity. This was interrogation. He couldn't comprehend selfless action because he'd never experienced it. Maybe your math is wrong, she said quietly. My math is never wrong. Then maybe your calculator is broken. She met his gray eyes without flinching. Because I'm worth exactly as much as you are. We both bleed red. We both have one life to live. We both matter. Something shifted in his expression. Confusion maybe. Or recognition of something he'd forgotten existed. My security team ran a background check on you, he said, changing direction. Interesting reading. Heat flooded her cheeks. You had no right. I have every right to investigate someone who knows where I was vulnerable. He moved to his desk, picked up a manila folder. Althea Maria Cruz. Age 26. High school graduate. Worked at Murphy's Diner. Lives with her grandmother, Isabella Cruz, age 73, heart condition. Each fact felt like a violation. Her life reduced to bullet points in a billionaire's file. Current debt, $23,847. Medical bills for your grandmother's medication. Rent 3 months behind. No savings. No assets beyond a 2003 Honda with 187,000 miles. Stop. Fired 2 days ago for tardiness. Facing eviction next week. He looked up from the file. Tell me, Althea, if you're worth as much as me, why is your life falling apart? The words hit harder than any physical blow. Because they were true. Because she was drowning in debt while he collected million-dollar paintings. Because the world had rewarded her kindness with poverty and punishment. Because the system is rigged, she whispered. Exactly. He set the folder down. The system rewards strength and punishes weakness. It elevates those who take and crushes those who give. That doesn't make it right. Right and wrong are luxuries for people who can afford them. You saved my life, and the world fired you for it. What does that tell you about right and wrong? Althea felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of him. It tells me the world needs more people who do the right thing anyway. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then something that might have been respect flickered across his features. You know what I think, Althea? I think you're either the most naive person I've ever met, or the most dangerous. Dangerous? How? People like you. People who act without calculating the cost. You're unpredictable. You can't be bought, can't be intimidated, can't be controlled. He leaned back against his desk. That makes you very dangerous indeed. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. A storm was coming. The eviction notice was taped to the door when Althea returned home at 11:30 p.m. Bold red letters that might as well have been written in blood. Final notice. 48 hours, T.O., vacate. She stared at the paper until the words blurred. 48 hours. 2 days to find a miracle or watch her grandmother lose the only home she'd known for 20 years. Mija. Her grandmother's voice drifted from inside the apartment, weak and worried. Is that you? It's me, Abuela. Althea crumpled the notice and shoved it in her pocket. Some burdens were too heavy to share. Inside, her grandmother sat at the kitchen table, her medication bottles arranged like tiny soldiers in front of her. Each one represented another month of choosing between rent and staying alive. How was your meeting with that man? Fine. He just wanted to thank me. Another lie. She was getting good at them. But her grandmother's eyes were sharp despite her age. Men like him don't thank people, Mija. They collect debts. Althea kissed the top of her grandmother's silver head. Don't worry about him. Worry about getting better. Across town, in his fortress mansion, Damien Holt stood at his office window, watching storm clouds gather over the city. The stitches in his cheek pulled tight when he frowned, but the pain felt distant, unimportant. What mattered were the phone calls he'd been receiving all day. Whispers from his network of informants. Rumors spreading through the underground like poison in the water supply. The crash hadn't been an accident. Someone had cut his brake lines. Someone had tried to kill him and nearly succeeded. Now they were circling like vultures, sensing weakness. His phone buzzed. Marcus, his head of security. Talk to me. 3 separate buyers tried to acquire your shipping contracts today. Councilman Torres is pushing for new zoning restrictions on your downtown properties. And the Thompson family made an offer on the Riverside development, 20% below market value. Sharks smelling blood in the water, Damien muttered. They think you're vulnerable. The accident, the hospital stay, it's got them thinking you're losing your edge. Damien touched the bandage on his forehead. He'd built his empire through fear and respect. Both were commodities that required constant maintenance. Show weakness once, and everyone wanted a piece of what you'd built. Schedule a meeting with Torres tomorrow, and increase security on all job sites. Already done. But boss, there's something else. What? The girl. Althea Cruz. Word's getting out that she's the one who pulled you from the car. Some people might see her as leverage. Damien's grip tightened on the phone. He'd spent 2 hours studying her in his office, trying to decode the puzzle she represented. Her selflessness felt alien, dangerous in ways he couldn't calculate. But the idea of someone using her to get to him sparked something dark and protective in his chest. Nobody touches her. Boss, you heard me. Put a security detail on her. Discreet but effective. If anyone so much as looks at her wrong, they answer to me. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then understood. Damien ended the call and returned to staring at the storm clouds. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the city he'd built his empire on. Every building, every street corner, every shadow held pieces of his power. But tonight, for the first time in years, he felt something he'd almost forgotten. Uncertainty. Althea Cruz had saved his life without asking for anything in return. In his world, that made her either a saint or a threat. He was beginning to suspect she might be both. The footsteps behind Althea started 3 blocks from the grocery store. Soft at first. Casual. The kind of sounds that could belong to anyone walking home on a Tuesday night. But when she turned left on Oak Street, they turned left too. When she slowed down to check her phone, they slowed down with her. Someone was following her. Althea's heart hammered as she clutched her bag of discount groceries, generic bread, expired milk, and the cheapest pasta she could find. $37 to feed herself and her grandmother for a week. But right now, food was the least of her problems. The footsteps grew closer. She ducked into the narrow alley between Rosario's Market and the old hardware store, pressing herself against the brick wall. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts that turned to white clouds in the cold night air. 2 men emerged from the shadows at the mouth of the alley. Neither wore suits like Holt's men. These guys looked rougher, dangerous in a different way. The kind of men who solved problems with their fists instead of their lawyers. Althea Cruz? The shorter one spoke, his voice gravelly from too many cigarettes. A scar ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, giving him a permanent sneer. I don't know what you want, but we want to give you some advice. The taller man stepped closer. He had prison tattoos crawling up his neck, an eye that had seen too much violence. Free advice. You should listen. Althea's back pressed harder against the brick wall. I don't have any money. We don't want your money, lady. We want you to understand something very important. Scarface pulled out a cigarette, lit it with hands that didn't shake. You saved the wrong man. I don't know what you're talking about. Damien Holt. The name hung in the air like smoke. You pulled him out of that burning car. Very heroic. Very stupid. He would have died. Exactly. The tall man's smile revealed teeth stained yellow from years of neglect. Some people were counting on that. Fear crawled up Althea's spine like ice water. These weren't random muggers or street thugs. They knew about the accident. They knew about her. Here's the thing about heroes, sweetheart, Scarface continued, taking a long drag. They always think they're doing good. But sometimes saving one monster means letting him destroy 100 innocent people. You're wrong. You just signed your own death warrant. The tall man stepped so close she could smell stale beer on his breath. Holt's got enemies. Real enemies. The kind who don't forgive and don't forget. Althea's hands trembled as she gripped her grocery bag tighter. What do you want from me? Stay away from him. Don't take his calls. Don't accept his money. Don't even think about him. Scarface flicked his cigarette into the darkness. Because every second you stay connected to Damien Holt is another second closer to your funeral. And if I don't? Both men exchanged a look that made her blood freeze. Well, let's just say accidents happen all the time in this city. Gas leaks, house fires, cars that lose their brakes on steep hills. The tall man's voice dropped to a whisper, just like what happened to Holt. Only next time, there won't be a hero around to save anyone. They turned and walked away, their footsteps echoing off the alley walls until they disappeared into the night. Althea stood there for 10 minutes, shaking, before she finally found the courage to run home. But even behind her locked door, she couldn't shake the feeling that saving Damien Holt's life had been the biggest mistake she'd ever made. Sleep didn't come that night. Althea lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling while her grandmother's soft snoring drifted through the thin walls. Every creak of the old building made her heart race. Every car that passed outside made her peek through the curtains. She thought the worst was behind her, but it was only the beginning. If you want to know how deep this story goes, subscribe before the next twist catches you off guard. The men's words echoed in her head like a broken record. You saved the wrong man. Every second you stay connected to Damien Holt is another second closer to your funeral. But how was she supposed to disconnect from someone she'd never chosen to connect with in the first place? At 4 a.m., she gave up on sleep and made coffee with trembling hands. The cheap instant stuff that tasted like burnt water, but caffeine was caffeine. She needed something to keep her sharp, keep her thinking. The truth hit her like a punch to the stomach. Saving Damien Holt hadn't been the climax of her story. It had been the opening chapter of a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Before that night on Highway 9, her biggest worry was paying rent. Now she had men in alleys threatening to kill her. She had a billionaire sociopath who saw her as either an asset or a threat. She had enemies she'd never met who wanted her dead for doing the right thing. Would you trade your safety for someone else's life? It was easy to say yes when the question was hypothetical. When you imagined yourself as the hero in some movie where good deeds led to happy endings. But real life wasn't a movie. Real life was messier, darker, more dangerous than Hollywood ever showed. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen table. Unknown number. At 4:17 a.m., Althea stared at the screen, paralyzed. It could be the hospital calling about her grandmother's test results. Could be a wrong number. Could be someone else who wanted to hurt her. Or it could be him. The phone stopped buzzing, then immediately started again. Same unknown number. On the third call, she answered. Hello. Silence. Then breathing. Slow and measured, like someone thinking very carefully about what to say next. Althea. The voice was rough, tired, but unmistakably familiar. We need to talk. Damien Holt. Even through the phone, his presence felt overwhelming. It's 4 a.m. I know what time it is. I also know you haven't been sleeping. How could he possibly know that? Unless. Althea's eyes darted to the window. Was someone watching her apartment? 2 men approached you tonight. In the alley behind Rosario's market. Her blood turned to ice. How do you? I told you I'd put security on you. They reported back. You're having me followed? Anger cut through her fear. You have no right. I have every right to protect what's mine. I'm not yours. I don't belong to anyone. His laugh was cold, humorless. You became mine the moment you pulled me from that burning car. Whether you like it or not. The line went quiet except for their breathing. 2 people connected by a choice that had changed everything. The men who threatened you work for Vincent Torres. He's a city councilman who's been trying to block my development projects for months. I don't care about your business problems. You should, because now they're your problems too. His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Torres thought killing me would solve his issues. When that failed, he's moving to plan B. Which is, hurt the people I care about. The words hit her like lightning. I care about, not the people who might be useful to me or potential assets. He'd said care about, but that was impossible. Men like Damien Holt didn't care about broke waitresses. They used them, manipulated them, discarded them when they were no longer useful. I'm coming over, he said. No. It's late, and my grandmother. The line went dead. Althea stared at her phone, knowing with absolute certainty that Damien Holt was already on his way. The knock came exactly 17 minutes later. Not the sharp, authoritative rap of his security team. This was different. Softer. Almost hesitant. Like someone who wasn't sure they should be there. Althea crept to the peephole and felt her breath catch. Damien Holt stood alone in the hallway. No bodyguards flanking him. No expensive suit armor. He wore dark jeans and a simple black sweater. The bandage on his forehead white against his pale skin. He looked smaller somehow. More human. More dangerous because of it. I know you're there, Althea. Open the door. She pressed her forehead against the wood, feeling the weight of an impossible decision. Let him in, and she stepped deeper into his world of violence and power. Keep him out, and the men who wanted to hurt her would eventually find another way. My grandmother is sleeping. Then we'll talk quietly. Against every instinct screaming at her to run, she unlocked the door. Up close, he looked worse than he had in his mansion office. The stitches on his cheek were angry red lines, and there were dark circles under his steel-gray eyes. He moved carefully, like someone fighting pain with every step. But his presence still filled the small hallway like smoke from a fire. You look terrible, she whispered. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his features. Hospital food and death threats don't agree with me. He stepped inside without invitation, his eyes taking inventory of everything. The cracked linoleum, the faded wallpaper, the smell of generic disinfectant trying to mask years of poverty. You should have let me die, he said quietly. The words hit her like a slap. What? In the car. You should have walked away, called 911, and waited for professionals. He turned to face her, and she saw something broken in his expression. Your life would be simpler if I was dead. Simpler isn't the same as right. Right. He repeated the word like it was foreign to him. You keep talking about right and wrong like they're real things. Like they matter. They do matter. Do they? Because from where I'm standing, doing the right thing has destroyed your life. You lost your job. You're facing eviction. Now you have killers threatening you in alleys. His voice was flat, matter-of-fact. Tell me again how much right and wrong matter. Althea's hands clenched into fists. Just because the world punishes kindness doesn't mean we should stop being kind. The world doesn't punish kindness. It devours it. He moved closer, and she could see the exhaustion etched in every line of his face. I've spent 15 years building walls around myself. Layers of security, money, power. All to keep people like Torres from getting close enough to hurt me. Then why are you here? Why aren't you hiding behind your walls? For a moment, he didn't answer. Just stared at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. Because you tore them all down in 30 seconds. The admission hung between them like a live wire, dangerous and electric. I don't understand. Neither do I. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. You risked your life for a stranger. You didn't ask for money, didn't want fame, didn't try to leverage it into something profitable. You just saved me. And I have no idea what to do with that. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Another storm was coming. Damien walked to her kitchen window, peering through the thin curtains at the street below. Even in the dim light, Althea could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he moved like a man expecting attack from any direction. Torres isn't working alone, he said without turning around. 3 months ago, he was just another corrupt city councilman taking bribes and blocking permits. Now he's got the resources to cut brake lines and hire killers. Someone's backing him. Someone with serious money and serious connections. Damien's reflection in the window looked haunted. I've been building my empire for 15 years. Made a lot of enemies along the way. Some I crushed completely. Others I just wounded and left alive. He turned back to face her, and she saw something she'd never expected in those steel gray eyes. Fear. Not for himself. For her. Big mistake leaving them alive. Wounded animals are the most dangerous kind. Althea's throat felt dry. Who are we talking about? Could be the Morrison family. I bought their shipping company out from under them 5 years ago. Could be Judge Castellanos. I have enough evidence of his bribery to put him away for life. Could be Police Chief Warren, who's been taking payments to look the other way on my construction projects. The list kept going, each name another enemy with motive and means. Althea felt like she was drowning in the scope of it. How do you live like this? Always looking over your shoulder, never knowing who to trust. You don't trust anyone. You don't get close to anyone. You don't give anyone leverage to hurt you. His voice was matter-of-fact, like he was describing the weather. It's worked for 15 years. Until now. Until now. He moved closer, and she could smell his cologne mixed with antiseptic from the hospital. Because now I have something to lose. The words hit her like electricity. Damien, you want to know why I really came here tonight? It wasn't to warn you about Torres or his friends. It was to give you a choice. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What kind of choice? I can make this all go away. One phone call and you disappear. New identity, new city. Enough money to take care of your grandmother for the rest of her life. You'll never see me again, never have to worry about my enemies finding you. The offer hung in the air between them like a lifeline. Safety, security, a normal life. And if I don't take it, then you stay in my world, with all the danger that comes with it. His eyes never left her face. Torres is just the beginning. There are others circling, waiting for any sign of weakness. They'll use you to get to me, hurt you to hurt me. Why would they think hurting me would affect you? The question seemed to surprise him, like he'd revealed more than he intended. Because, he paused, running a hand through his dark hair. Because you're the first person in 15 years who looked at me and saw something worth saving. The admission hit her like lightning. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Like someone confessing a secret that scared him more than any enemy ever could. I can't protect you from everything, Althea. My world is violent, unpredictable, dangerous. People who get close to me have a habit of getting hurt. Like Detective Rodriguez. Like Detective Rodriguez. Like City Attorney Hayes, who accidentally fell down a flight of stairs after investigating my shipping contracts. Like Councilwoman Parks, who died in a house fire 3 days after voting against one of my development projects. Each name was another weight pressing down on her chest. Another life destroyed by proximity to Damien Holt. So that's my choice? run away or become another casualty. Those are the only two options in my world. But even as he said it, Althea could see something else in his eyes. Hope, maybe. Or desperation. Like he was praying she'd find a third option that didn't exist. The storm outside was getting closer. Lightning flickered through the curtains, illuminating both their faces in stark black and white. How long do I have to decide? Until morning. After that, Torres and his backers will move to the next phase of their plan. Damien's voice was heavy with certainty. And once that happens, there won't be any safe choices left. After Damien left at dawn, Althea couldn't shake what she'd seen in his eyes. Not the cold calculation that had terrified her in his mansion office. Something else. Something that looked almost like loneliness. She'd spent the rest of the night watching him when he thought she wasn't looking. The way he winced when he moved too quickly, still healing from the crash. How his fingers unconsciously touched the stitches on his cheek when he was thinking. The careful way he sat in her grandmother's old kitchen chair, like he was afraid his weight might break something precious. Most telling of all was how he looked at the photo on her refrigerator. Her and her grandmother at last year's church picnic, both of them laughing at something long forgotten. "You take care of her alone?" he'd ask quietly. "For 10 years now, since my parents died." Something had shifted in his expression then. Pain, maybe. Or recognition. "My mother died when I was 12, he'd said. "Cancer. My father, he didn't handle it well. Started drinking, gambling away what little we had left." Althea had waited, sensing there was more. "I swore I'd never be powerless like that again. Never let anyone else control whether the people I cared about lived or died." His voice had been barely above a whisper. Turned out the best way to avoid losing people was never to care about them in the first place. The admission had hit her like lightning. Here was the source of his ruthlessness, not cruelty for its own sake, but armor built around a 12-year-old boy who'd lost everything. Now, sitting in the morning light streaming through her kitchen window, Althea tried to reconcile the two versions of Damien Holt. The billionaire who destroyed lives without blinking. The broken man who'd spent 15 years building walls around his heart. Which one was real? Maybe they both were. Maybe that was what made him so dangerous and so human. Her grandmother shuffled into the kitchen, walker scraping against the linoleum. "You didn't sleep, Mija." "Couldn't." "The man who was here, he's the one from the accident, isn't he?" Althea nodded, too tired to lie anymore. Her grandmother moved to the coffee pot with practiced efficiency, her weathered hands steady despite her age. "He's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "A monster." She poured 2 cups of coffee, added sugar to both. But monsters don't sit in broken kitchen chairs like they're afraid to damage them. They don't look at pictures of families with longing in their eyes. You were listening. These walls are thin, and I've lived a long time. I know the difference between a man who chooses evil and one who's been shaped by it. Althea accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. Does it matter? Either way, people get hurt. It matters because one can be changed. The other can only be stopped. Through the window, Althea could see the city waking up. People heading to jobs that paid their bills, worried about normal problems like traffic and deadlines. A world that suddenly felt impossibly far away. "He gave me a choice, Abuela. I can disappear, new identity, enough money for your medicine, a safe life somewhere else. Or stay in his world, with all the danger that brings." Her grandmother was quiet for a long moment, sipping her coffee and studying Althea's face. "What does your heart tell you, Mija? That I'm scared? That I should run as far as I can and never look back? And that maybe he needs someone to see the man instead of the monster?" Her grandmother smiled sadly. "Ah, Mija, you always were too kind for this world." The phone rang at 8:47 a.m. The same unknown number from the night before. "Have you decided?" Damien's voice was businesslike controlled. All traces of vulnerability from their midnight conversation were gone. I need more time. Time is what we don't have. Torres moved up his timeline. His people are already mobilizing. Althea's stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means if you're staying, you need protection. Now. And if I go, then you have 2 hours to pack before my people escort you to the airport. 2 hours to abandon everything she'd ever known. 2 hours to decide if saving a life had been worth destroying her own. There's a third option, Damien continued when she didn't respond. Which is, you come work for me. Officially. It gives me legal grounds to provide security, and it gives you a reason to be in my world that my enemies can understand. Work for him. The idea sent ice through her veins. Doing what? Personal assistant. Event planning. Whatever sounds believable on paper. His voice was matter-of-fact, like they were discussing the weather. The salary is $200,000 a year, plus benefits, plus housing in a secure building I own downtown. $200,000. More money than she'd made in her entire life combined. That's not a job offer. That's ownership. It's protection with compensation. What's the difference? Silence on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. The difference is choice. You can walk away anytime. Can I? Because it sounds like once I step into your world, I don't get to step back out. You're already in my world, Althea. The moment you pulled me from that burning car, you became part of it. The question now is whether you want protection or whether you want to face my enemies alone. She hated that he was right, hated that saving a life had trapped her in a web she didn't understand. What about my grandmother? Private nurse. Best medical care money can buy. Security detail that looks like home health aides. He'd thought of everything. Every angle, every concern, every way to make his offer impossible to refuse. You don't give people choices. You give them the illusion of choices while backing them into corners. I give people what they need to survive, whether they recognize it or not. There it was. The cold calculation that made him so dangerous. Even his kindness came with strings attached, designed to serve his purposes. And what happens when you decide I'm no longer useful? When the threat passes and you don't need a pet waitress anymore? That won't happen. How do you know? Another long pause. When he spoke again, his voice carried an edge she couldn't identify. Because useful and necessary aren't the same thing. The distinction hit her like lightning. Useful was temporary, disposable. Necessary was permanent, irreplaceable. 30 minutes, Althea. Airport, job, or take your chances with Torres. Those are your options. The line went dead. Althea stared at her phone, feeling the weight of an impossible decision. No matter what she chose, she'd be trading one kind of prison for another. But at least in Damien's cage, her grandmother would live. Her phone buzzed with a text from the same unknown number. Car will be there in 25 minutes. Pack light. Everything else will be provided. 25 minutes to decide between safety and freedom. Between the devil she knew and the one she didn't. Outside, storm clouds were gathering again. It seemed like her life had been nothing but storms since that night on Highway 9. Maybe it was time to stop running from them and learn to dance in the rain. By noon, the rumors had started spreading through the city like wildfire. At the Harbor Club, where politicians and judges sipped expensive whiskey and made deals that shaped the city's future, the whispers came in hushed tones over lunch. Heard Holt's got himself a new assistant. Since when does Damien Holt need an assistant? Since he nearly died in that car crash. Word is, she's the one who saved him. The waitress from Murphy's? You're kidding. Dead serious. Moved her into the Meridian Tower this morning. Top floor, right below his penthouse. At the precinct, cops who'd spent years taking Holt's money to look the other way exchanged worried glances over stale coffee and cold donuts. Something's different about him since the accident. Different how? Softer. More careful. Like he's got something to lose now. Damien, Holt doesn't get soft. He gets even. Maybe. But Torres is betting otherwise. In the courthouse, lawyers and clerks, who'd watched Holt manipulate the system for 15 years, gathered in small groups, their voices filled with speculation and fear. You think it's true? That some nobody waitress has gotten under his skin? If it is, Torres picked the perfect time to make his move. A weakness like that, it could bring down everything Holt's built. Or it could make him more dangerous than ever. Nothing scarier than a killer with something to protect. But the most dangerous whispers came from a private dining room in the city's most exclusive restaurant, where Vincent Torres sat across from two men whose faces never appeared in newspapers. "She's the key," Torres said, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. Holt spent 15 years being untouchable because he had nothing to lose. Now he does. The older of his companions, silver-haired, expensive suit, eyes like dead fish, nodded slowly. "The Morrison family appreciates your insight, Councilman. But insight without action is worthless. I'm not suggesting we rush in. Holt's still dangerous, possibly more so now. But for the first time since he crawled out of whatever hole he came from, he's vulnerable." "And the girl?" Torres smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Leverage. The more invested he becomes in protecting her, the more power we have over him." "You're playing a dangerous game," the younger man warned. His accent carried traces of Eastern Europe, and his hands bore scars that spoke of violence as a profession. Holt has survived 15 years by being smarter and more ruthless than his enemies. He survived 15 years by being alone. Isolation was his strength. Torres set down his knife, his eyes gleaming with confidence. Now it's his weakness. Back at the Meridian Tower, Althea stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new apartment, watching the city spread out below like a living map of power and corruption. 20 floors down, people moved like ants, unaware that their lives were being shaped by the decisions made in rooms like this. The apartment was beautiful, marble countertops, hardwood floors, furniture that probably cost more than she used to make in a year. But beauty couldn't hide the fact that it was still a cage, no matter how luxurious. Her phone buzzed. A text from Damien. "Security briefing at 6 p.m. Don't leave the building until then." She typed back, "I'm not your prisoner." His response came immediately, "No. You're something much more dangerous." "Which is?" "You're someone I care about." The admission hit her like lightning. Not because it was surprising. She'd felt the shift between them, the way his walls had started crumbling. But because it meant Torres was right. She wasn't just a person anymore. She was leverage. A weapon that could be used against the most dangerous man in the city. And somehow, that realization didn't scare her as much as it should have. The security briefing lasted 3 hours and left Althea's head spinning with details she'd never wanted to know. Marcus, Damien's head of security, had laid out the threats with military precision. Torres and his backers weren't just planning to hurt her, they were planning to destroy everything Damien had built, with her as the catalyst. "They'll try to take you first," Marcus explained, pointing to surveillance photos spread across the conference table. "Not to kill you, but to control you. Use you to force the boss into making mistakes." "What kind of mistakes?" "The kind that get people killed and empires toppled." Damien sat at the head of the table, his face carved from stone as he listened to the plans his enemies had made. But Althea caught the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched when Marcus described the various ways they might try to get to her. "There's another option," she said quietly when Marcus finished his presentation. Both men looked at her. "I leave. Tonight. Disappear completely. Take your money and vanish." "That ship sailed this morning," Marcus replied. "Torres knows you're here. Knows you matter to the boss. Running now just makes you a target without protection." "He's right," Damien said. "It's too late for safe choices." Althea stood up, pacing to the window. Outside, the city glittered like scattered diamonds, beautiful and sharp enough to cut. So my choices are, stay here as bait or run and get killed anyway. Your choice is simpler than that, Damien said, rising from his chair. He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body. Trust me or don't. She turned to face him. And if I trust you, then I promise you'll survive this. Your grandmother will be safe. Your life will be better than it was before. But not free. Freedom is an illusion, Althea. Everyone serves someone, their boss, their debts, their circumstances. The only difference is choosing who you serve and what you get in return. It was a cold way to look at the world, but she couldn't argue with the logic. And if I don't trust you, then you face Torres and his people alone. With all the resources I would have used to protect, you turned toward protecting myself instead. The ultimatum hung between them like a blade. Althea studied his face, looking for tells, for cracks in the mask. What she found surprised her, not calculation or manipulation, but genuine fear. Not of Torres or his threats, but of her answer. Why does it matter so much? You barely know me. I know enough. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. You risked your life for a stranger without asking for anything in return. You see good in people even when they've forgotten it exists in themselves. You make me remember what it felt like to be human. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable. That's not love, Damien. That's projection. Maybe, but it's the closest I've come to either in 15 years. Outside, lightning flickered through the storm clouds that had been building all day. The city held its breath, waiting for the storm to break. Althea stood at a crossroads. But so do we. Only subscribers will see the full story of where this path leads. Don't miss the next move. I need one promise, she said finally. Name it. My grandmother. Whatever happens between us, whatever this becomes, she stays protected. Even if I leave, even if I betray you, even if you decide I'm not worth the trouble anymore. He nodded without hesitation. Done. And I want to meet them. The people trying to hurt us. I want to understand what I'm walking into. Absolutely not. Too dangerous. Then we don't have a deal. She turned away from the window, her decision made. I'm not a chess piece to be moved around a board. If I'm staying in your world, I do it with my eyes open. Damien was silent for a long moment, weighing risks and benefits with a cold calculation that had kept him alive for 15 years. 24 hours, he said finally. I'll arrange a meeting, but it happens on my terms, with my security. Agreed. And afterward, no more questions about trust. Althea looked out at the storm that was finally beginning to break over the city. Rain started pattering against the windows like tears from a weeping sky. Afterward, we find out if you're the man I saved from that burning car, or the monster everyone thinks you are. What she chose would shock everyone, including herself. The meeting happened at midnight in an abandoned warehouse on the east side, where the smell of rust and decay hung in the air like a promise of violence. Althea sat in the back seat of Damien's armored sedan, her heart hammering as they drove through streets she'd never seen before. Industrial. Forgotten. The kind of place where people disappeared and nobody asked questions. Last chance to change your mind, Damien said without looking at her. His voice was calm, but she could see the tension in his hands where they gripped the steering wheel. I need to see their faces. Need to understand what we're up against. What I'm up against. You don't have to carry this weight. But they both knew that was a lie. She'd been carrying it since the moment she pulled him from that burning car. Every choice since then had only made the burden heavier. Inside the warehouse, Vincent Torres waited with his two backers, the silver-haired Morrison patriarch and the scarred man whose name she'd never learn. They sat at a metal table, like judges preparing to deliver a sentence. Damien's security flanked the entrance, weapons visible but not drawn. A careful balance of power and restraint. Councilman Torres, Damien's voice echoed in the cavernous space. Gentlemen, I believe you wanted to discuss terms. Not terms. Reality. Torres smiled, but his eyes were cold as winter rain. Your reality has changed, Holt. Used to be, threats against you were just business. Now they're personal. His gaze shifted to Althea, and she felt like prey being sized up by a predator. Miss Cruz, the famous Good Samaritan. Do you understand what you've walked into? I'm beginning to. Are you? Because from where I sit, you look like a woman who's made a very dangerous mistake. Damien stepped forward, his body language shifting into something predatory. Careful, Torres. You're talking about someone under my protection. Protection. The Morrison patriarch spoke for the first time, his voice cultured and cold. 15 years, and Damien Holt finally finds something worth protecting. How human of you. The word dripped with contempt. Here's what's going to happen, Torres continued, ignoring the threat radiating from Damien. You're going to withdraw your bid on the Riverside development. You're going to stop blocking my zoning proposals. And you're going to transfer 40% of your shipping contracts to Morrison Industries. Or, Torres's smile widened. Or Miss Cruz learns what happened to the last person who got too close to you. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Althea could feel violence building in the space between them like pressure before storm. You're making a mistake, Damien said quietly. One you won't survive. Maybe. But you'll make the deal anyway. Torres leaned back in his chair, confident. Because for the first time in your life, you have something to lose. The scarred man finally spoke, his accent thick. In my country, we have saying, man who loves something gives his enemy's knife to cut his heart. Your country also doesn't exist anymore, Damien replied. Funny how that works. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Torres stood up, brushing imaginary dust from his expensive suit. You have 48 hours to consider our proposal. After that, Miss Cruz becomes fair game. As they walked away, Althea heard Torres whisper to his companions, he'll make the deal. Men like Holt always choose their hearts over their empires. But what Torres didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that Damien Holt had spent 15 years building his empire precisely because his heart had been broken beyond repair. Until now. They're wrong, you know, Althea said as they drove back through the empty streets. About what? They think caring about me makes you weak. But I've seen what you're capable of when you don't care about anything. This version of you, the one with something to lose, is the most dangerous thing they'll ever face. In the darkness, she caught his reflection in the window. For the first time since she'd known him, Damien Holt was smiling. And it was terrifying. 3 months later, Vincent Torres was found dead in his study, an apparent suicide. The note left behind confessed to years of corruption and named several co-conspirators who would soon face similar fates. The Morrison patriarch died in a boating accident off the coast of Maine. The scarred man simply vanished, as if he'd never existed at all. Officially, Damien Holt had nothing to do with any of it. Unofficially, the city understood that some debts could only be paid in blood. Althea stood at the window of her penthouse apartment. Not the luxurious cage she'd first been given, but a real home she'd chosen for herself. The Meridian Tower stretched below her, and beyond that, the city sparkled like scattered diamonds in the evening light. Her grandmother had recovered fully the best medical care money could buy, working miracles that had seemed impossible months ago. She lived in comfort now, with round-the-clock care and all the medication she needed. The price of that miracle sat in the chair behind her, reading financial reports with the same intensity he'd once reserved for planning revenge. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked without turning around. "Regret what?" "Letting me save you. Letting me into your world. Choosing to care about something again." Damien set down his papers, and she could hear him moving closer. His reflection appeared beside hers in the window, and she was struck again by how different he looked now. Still dangerous, still powerful, but somehow more human. Every day, he said quietly. The admission hit her like cold water. Why? Because caring about you has made me capable of things that would have horrified me before. Torres wasn't the first person to threaten what's mine. He won't be the last. And each time, I find myself willing to go further, to cross lines I didn't even know existed. She turned to face him, seeing the weight he carried in his steel-gray eyes. Are you saying I made you more of a monster? I'm saying you gave me something worth becoming a monster for. The distinction was important, though she wasn't sure why. Outside, snow began to fall, the first of winter. Fat flakes drifted past the window, like secrets being whispered to the wind. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd driven past that night. If I'd seen the accident and just called 911 instead of stopping. You'd be working double shifts at Murphy's Diner, worried about paying rent and buying your grandmother's medication. Living paycheck to paycheck with no security and no future. But I'd be free. Would you? Or would you just be trapped in a different kind of cage? It was a question she'd asked herself 100 times without finding an answer. The people who matter think I saved you that night, she said. But I'm starting to wonder if it was the other way around. Maybe we saved each other. The ending feels uncertain, doesn't it? If you don't subscribe, you'll never know where stories like this lead. And one day, you may miss the truth that could change everything. He moved closer, and she could smell his cologne, feel the warmth radiating from his body. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Do you know what the difference is between fate and choice, Althea? Tell me. Fate is what brought you to that highway the night I crashed. Choice is what made you stop. And everything after? His hand found hers, fingers intertwining like puzzle pieces, finally finding their match. Everything after is what happens when fate and choice collide. She looked out at the city, their city now, and wondered if she was looking at her kingdom or her prison. Maybe both. Maybe that was the price of loving a man who owned the darkness and had learned to paint it in shades of gray. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and she realized that storms had followed her ever since that night on Highway 9. The question was whether she was running from them or learning to dance in the rain. As lightning flickered across the sky, illuminating both their faces in stark black and white, Althea Cruz finally understood the truth. She hadn't saved Damien Holt from that burning car. She'd saved him from himself. But in doing so, she'd become something she'd never intended to be. Not his victim, not his possession, but his equal in a world where power was the only currency that mattered. Whether that made her his salvation or his damnation remained to be seen. But as the storm broke over the city, they now ruled together. One thing was certain. There was no going back. Was this fate or the start of her downfall? Only time would tell.